am Charlotte Hayes, 25 years old, and my whole life has been a battle to be believed. My family had a nickname for me long before they ever gave me credit for anything real. The dramatic one. The girl who cried wolf. But that 4th of July, when my lungs seized and my vision blurred, when my father snapped, "Quit faking it," as I gasped for air on his kitchen floor, everything changed. My Aunt Beatrice swore I was only trying to dodge cleanup duty. Nobody expected that when the paramedic checked my pulse, he would shout for a stretcher and the whole room would erupt in panic. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, what happened next changed my life forever. Growing up in the Hayes household meant one thing above all else. Weakness was unacceptable. My father, Richard Hayes, ran our home the way he ran his construction company. Rigid schedules, zero excuses, and a voice that could carry clean across a job site from 100 yards. Richard Hayes was not a man you complained to unless you wanted a 20-minute lecture about real problems, usually involving concrete pours and men twice your age who'd broken bones and still shown up for their shift. From my earliest memories, whenever I felt sick or hurt, I met skepticism instead of sympathy. When I was 7 and broke my wrist falling out of the old sycamore tree in our backyard, Dad made me finish washing the dinner dishes, one-handed, before finally driving me to urgent care, utterly convinced I was exaggerating. The doctor later told him, only half joking, that he was lucky there'd been no permanent damage from the delay. That pattern followed me through my entire childhood, a steady drumbeat telling me my pain didn't matter, that my experience of my own body was somehow less valid than everyone else's. My mother, Vivian, died when I was 4, leaving Dad to raise me and my younger sister Sophie alone. Maybe that explains his harshness. Never excuses it. Mom had been the soft buffer between his hard pragmatism and our very normal childhood vulnerabilities. Without her, Sophie and I were left standing fully exposed to his unfiltered judgment, like two saplings with no windbreak. Aunt Beatrice, Dad's sister, was cut from exactly the same cloth, just with better hair and a string of pearls. She never arrived at a family gathering without a critical comment dressed up as concern. "Are you sure you should be eating that, Charlotte?" Or, "Well, that outfit is certainly a choice." She'd appointed herself my feminine role model after Mom died, but her version of guidance was mostly criticism with a thin coat of varnish over it. Somewhere, deep down, I think even she knew it, which is probably why she overcompensated with the pearls. The only person who ever fully believed me was Sophie, 3 years younger, who had somehow escaped the dramatic label that clung to me like static. When I had migraines so bad I was vomiting in the bathroom, Sophie would quietly bring me water and sit with me in the dark, not saying a word, just being there. When Dad accused me of faking sick to skip school, she'd defend me in her soft-spoken way, even though it rarely changed his mind. By 16, I'd internalized their dismissal so completely that I started doubting my own experiences. Maybe I really was being dramatic. Maybe normal people didn't feel pain the way I did. I stopped mentioning when I felt unwell, pushing through fevers and injuries with a stubbornness that would have impressed a Marine. This, of course, only reinforced everyone's belief that my earlier complaints had been exaggerated. It's a tidy little trap. The better you get at hiding pain, the more proof people have that you never had any to begin with. Getting accepted to Ashford State University, 300 miles away, felt like a prison break, complete with a fantasy soundtrack playing in my head as I packed my car. For 4 years I built a life where people simply took me at my word. My roommate Rosalind never blinked when I said I needed a quiet day for a migraine. My professors granted extensions when I was genuinely sick. For the first time I understood what it felt like to be believed, to have my own experience of my own body treated as valid information instead of a performance. After graduation, I landed a marketing job in Bristol and told myself I'd never move back home. I called on holidays, visited twice a year with meticulously planned exit strategies. I once faked a work emergency at hour 4 of a 6-hour visit. I'm not proud of it, but I'd do it again, and built a whole separate life away from the family that had taught me to distrust my own reality. Then the economy did what economies occasionally do, and did it spectacularly badly. Our firm lost 3 major clients in a single month. As one of the newest hires, I was among the first let go. Between student loans and Bristol rent, my savings vanished with alarming speed. It was like watching a card trick where the money is the card and it never comes back. After 3 fruitless months of job hunting, I faced the unthinkable. Moving back to my hometown of Elmsworth. Dad offered me the apartment above his garage rent-free, until I got back on my feet. Sophie, now a nurse at the local hospital, seemed genuinely glad to have me nearby. Even Aunt Beatrice made vague noises about connections at the country club who might be hiring, which in Beatrice speak roughly translates to, "I will mention your unemployment to 6 different women over canapes." Swallowing what remained of my pride, I packed up my Bristol apartment and drove home. The 4th of July cookout was an annual family tradition. The Hayeses, plus a rotating cast of aunts, uncles, and cousins, gathered at our house for a barbecue before watching the town fireworks from our backyard, which overlooked Elmsworth's public park. This year, with me back home, Dad made it very clear he expected me to take over hosting duties, the ones that had once been Mom's, then fell to whichever female relative could be guilt-tripped into it after she died. "Aunt Beatrice has handled the food long enough," he announced. "Time to pull your weight." So I spent the week before the 4th cleaning the house, planning a menu and shopping for supplies, all while continuing my increasingly desperate job search, essentially running 2 full-time jobs, one of which paid in criticism. The pressure to produce a flawless gathering weighed on me constantly. I knew any flaw would be blamed on my supposed incompetence, rather than on the impossible bar that had been set for me since childhood. Little did I know this family gathering would become a turning point, not just in how my family saw me, but in whether I would survive the week at all. The first sign something was wrong came 3 days before the 4th. I woke up unusually exhausted despite nearly 9 hours of sleep. My body felt heavy, like I was wading through water, and climbing the stairs to the kitchen left me winded. "You're out of shape," I told myself, echoing words I'd heard from my father 1,000 times. I ignored the strange fatigue and got back to my to-do list. That afternoon, vacuuming the living room, I had to stop twice just to catch my breath. A dull ache had settled into my right calf, which I dismissed as a muscle strain from all the cleaning. I'd spent years learning to ignore my body's signals, to push through discomfort rather than risk the label. That evening I called Victoria, Tori, my best friend from college who'd become my lifeline since moving back. "You sound terrible," she said after I coughed my way through an update on the job search. "Thanks a lot," I laughed, ignoring a strange tightness in my chest. "Just tired from cleaning. Dad wants this party to be perfect." "Your dad could hire actual cleaners with what he makes," Tori pointed out. "He just wants to keep you busy so you feel indebted." "Maybe," I admitted. "But what choice do I have right now?" "Just be careful, Lottie," she said, her voice softening. "You know how you get when you're back there, ignoring your body when it's clearly telling you something." I promised her I'd rest. Then I stayed up until midnight prepping food for the party instead. By the morning of July 3rd, the pain in my leg had sharpened, joined now by an occasional stabbing pain in my chest whenever I took a deep breath. I wrapped my calf in a bandage, took some over-the-counter painkillers, and kept going. The little voice suggesting something might be seriously wrong got drowned out by the much louder voice, the one that sounded remarkably like my father calling me dramatic. The morning of the 4th, I woke up feeling decidedly wrong. My breathing felt shallow, like I couldn't quite fill my lungs all the way. Just getting dressed left me dizzy. Still, I had a party to host, and nothing was ready to my father's standards, which existed on a scale somewhere between military inspection and royal wedding. I pushed through, setting up tables in the backyard, arranging chairs, hanging red, white, and blue streamers. Every task took twice the effort it should have, but I chalked it up to stress and bad sleep. By noon I was moving in slow motion, but the backyard looked genuinely festive. A table set for 16 people, streamers snapping in the breeze like they, at least, had somewhere to be. Sophie arrived early to help and took one look at me, frowning. "You look terrible, Lottie. Are you feeling okay?" "Just tired," I said, the automatic response so ingrained I didn't even consider a different answer. "Can you help me carry the coolers out?" As we lugged the heavy ice-packed coolers to the backyard, a sharp pain shot through my chest so intense I nearly dropped my end, which, had it landed on my foot, would have added insult to a very serious injury. Sophie noticed my grimace immediately. "Seriously, what is wrong?" she pressed. "Nothing. Pulled a muscle, probably." I forced a smile, ignoring how hard my heart was racing despite barely moving. By 2 o'clock, guests began arriving. Uncle Gregory and Aunt Diane with their teenagers, Dad's cousin Oliver and his new wife, and Grandmother Hayes, 86 years old and still sharp enough to win at cards without anyone noticing she was cheating. With each arrival I put on a brighter smile, ignoring the tightening in my chest and a strange tingling in my fingers. Aunt Beatrice arrived last, as always, sweeping in with a critical eye over the decorations. "Well, you certainly went with a theme, didn't you?" she said, surveying the patriotic bunting I'd spent hours arranging. Then she turned to me, eyebrows arching. "Good heavens, Charlotte, you look terrible. Trying to get attention again." "Nice to see you too, Aunt Beatrice," I said, taking her casserole dish with hands that felt strangely numb. "Everyone's in the backyard. You should put some color on your face before joining us," she advised, patting my cheek like I was a nervous horse. "No one wants to look at someone half dead at a party." The irony of that sentence would not hit me until much later, and when it did, it hit like a truck. By the time we sat down to eat, I was struggling to keep up the facade of normalcy. Breathing had become something I had to consciously manage, each inhale incomplete, like my lungs were filling with cotton wool instead of air. I picked at my plate, unable to muster any appetite despite having skipped breakfast to finish the prep. Dad noticed, of course. Nothing escaped his radar when it came to perceived failings. "After all the money I spent on food, you could at least eat it," he muttered, passing the potato salad. I nodded and forced down a forkful, though swallowing took real effort. Across the table, Sophie watched with worried eyes but said nothing. She'd learned, same as I had, that challenging Dad in front of family only made things worse. As dessert was served, the pressure in my chest intensified into a sharp, stabbing pain radiating through my right side, and I gasped audibly. A few heads turned, then quickly turned back when I managed a smile. "Bathroom," I murmured to no one in particular, rising unsteadily. In the downstairs bathroom, I gripped the sink and stared at my reflection. The face looking back was frightening, lips with a bluish tinge, skin pale and clammy, eyes wide with a fear I could no longer talk myself out of. This wasn't stress. This wasn't anxiety. Something was very wrong. "Get it together," I whispered, repeating the mantra my father had drilled into me since childhood. "Stop being dramatic." But my body was done taking instructions from that voice. I stayed in the bathroom several minutes trying to compose myself before heading back out. Just walking those few steps left me dizzy and gasping. Dad caught my arm as I stumbled back to my chair. "You okay?" The question carried more annoyance than concern. "Fine," I managed, the lie automatic by now. As dessert wrapped up, Dad stood and clapped for attention. "All right, everyone. Sophie and Charlotte will handle cleanup while the rest of us head to the front yard for the fireworks." Sophie started gathering plates, shooting me worried glances as I stayed seated, trying to find the energy to stand again. "I'll handle this," Sophie said quietly. "You look like you're about to pass out." "No," I insisted, forcing myself up. "Dad will notice." In the kitchen, I loaded the dishwasher while Sophie scraped leftovers into containers. Simply bending down sent waves of dizziness through me. The kitchen lights seemed too bright, then too dim, my vision narrowing strangely at the edges. The stack of plates in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I tried to set them on the counter, and my arms simply refused. The crash of shattering dishes echoed through the kitchen as they slipped from my grip. The noise brought Dad storming back in, his face dark. "What the hell, Charlotte? Those were your mother's plates." I tried to explain, but my lungs seemed to lock shut. I couldn't draw enough air to form words. My hand went to my chest, pressing against a vice-like pain that had taken up residence there. I can't breathe," I finally gasped, barely audible. Dad rolled his eyes, reading my physical collapse as an emotional tantrum over broken china. "Quit faking it," he snapped. "Clean this up and get back to work." Aunt Beatrice appeared behind him, surveying the wreckage with disapproval. "Really, Charlotte? We all know you've always tried to weasel out of cleanup duty. But this is ridiculous." The edges of my vision were going dark now. I reached for the counter and knocked over a glass, which joined the carnage on the floor. "She is not faking it," Sophie said, her voice rising in alarm as she rushed to my side. "Look at her. Something is really wrong." "She's always been like this," Dad dismissed, though a flicker of doubt crossed his face as he actually looked at me, gasping. Uncle Gregory stepped in, drawn by the commotion, his expression shifting from curiosity to real concern. "Maybe we should call someone," he said, moving closer. "She's fine," Dad insisted, though his voice had lost most of its conviction. "She just needs to calm down." "I can't breathe," I repeated between desperate gasps. The room spun, faces blurring as my oxygen-starved brain struggled to keep up. My legs gave out, and I slid down against the cabinets, landing amid the broken plates. "Enough," Sophie shouted, a sound so uncharacteristic for my usually soft-spoken sister that it briefly silenced the whole kitchen. "I'm calling 911. Look at her lips, they're blue." "Don't you dare," Dad warned, but Sophie was already dialing, backing away when he moved toward her. "If you're wrong," Aunt Beatrice said, though fear had crept into her voice now, "you will never hear the end of this." I was beyond caring about anyone's reaction by that point. My entire focus had narrowed to the losing battle for air. Through the gathering darkness, I heard Sophie's voice, steady and clear, talking to the dispatcher. "My sister can't breathe. Yes, she's conscious, barely. 25. No previous heart or lung conditions that we know of." A new voice cut through the chaos, my grandmother who'd entered unnoticed. "Give her space," she commanded, and, small miracle, everyone actually listened. She knelt beside me despite her arthritic knees and took my hand. "Help is coming, child," she said, the only person in the room who seemed to fully grasp how serious this was. Time turned strange and elastic. I had no idea how long I lay there fighting for each breath before sirens finally cut through the air. Heavy boots, unfamiliar voices, new faces in my narrowing field of vision. A young paramedic knelt beside me and checked my wrist for a pulse. His professional calm vanished instantly. "Get the stretcher in here now," he shouted to his partner. "Pulse is 140 and thready. Oxygen sats critically low." The room erupted. Dad stood frozen, his face gone the color of old drywall as the reality finally broke through his denial. Aunt Beatrice had backed against the wall, hand over her mouth. Sophie was crying while answering rapid-fire questions, grandmother's hands steady on her shoulders. As the paramedics worked around me, monitors and oxygen mask, I caught a glimpse of my father's expression. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes, and underneath it, the dawning horror of realizing he'd been catastrophically, dangerously wrong. The oxygen helped a little, but breathing stayed a fight. The paramedics spoke in clipped, urgent medical shorthand, cyanotic, tachycardic, as they lifted me onto the stretcher. My vision narrowed to a pinpoint, my family's faces receding into the dark, as they rushed me out of the house where I had never once been believed. Fragments of awareness came and went in the ambulance, bright ceiling lights sliding past, the pressure of the oxygen mask, the paramedics' voices low but urgent. "BP's dropping, 70/40. Get another line in. Possible P. Call ahead to the ER." Sophie was somehow there, holding my hand, face streaked with tears. "Hang on, Lottie," she kept saying. "Please hang on." I tried to nod, to squeeze her hand, anything to let her know I heard her, but my body wasn't taking requests. At the hospital, I was wheeled through automatic doors under a blur of fluorescent lights. 25-year-old female, acute respiratory distress, tachycardic, hypotensive, the paramedic rattled off to the trauma team. A doctor leaned over me, shining a light in my eyes. Charlotte, can you hear me? I'm Dr. Whitmore. We're going to take care of you. Monitors beeped, needles pricked. Voices called out numbers I didn't understand. I need a chest CT, stat, and get ultrasound in here for her leg. Sat still dropping. Start her on heparin. We intubate if she doesn't improve in the next 2 minutes. Somewhere beneath the fear, a strange calm settled over me. These people believed me. They looked at my distress and responded with exactly the alarm it deserved. After a lifetime of dismissal, that validation felt almost as vital as the oxygen itself. The scan confirmed what the team already suspected. A deep vein thrombosis in my right leg had thrown a clot, technically several, into my lungs. A massive pulmonary embolism. Critical condition. A mask was placed over my face, different from the oxygen mask, and a voice told me they needed to put me to sleep for a while to help me breathe. Darkness took me before I could answer. I have no memory of the next 12 hours. Sophie later told me I was intubated, a tube doing the breathing my own lungs couldn't manage, while powerful blood thinners went to work on the clots and a specialized catheter was threaded through my veins to physically break up the largest one threatening my life. Dad arrived 20 minutes after the ambulance, having followed in his truck with grandmother and Aunt Beatrice. He paced the waiting room all night, refusing to sit, refusing to speak, until the doctor came out and used the words life-threatening and critical condition, at which point he reportedly had to brace himself against the wall like the wall had personally wronged him. Aunt Beatrice left soon after, claiming the stress was too much for her heart. Everyone present understood she was really fleeing the evidence of her own part in it. Uncle Gregory stayed, keeping quiet watch over Sophie and making sure Dad didn't collapse. The world came back to me slowly. First the steady beep of monitors, then the antiseptic hospital smell, then the raw ache in my throat where the breathing tube had been. I opened my eyes to a dim hospital room. Sophie sat beside the bed, asleep with her head drooping, hand still wrapped around mine. "Abby, Lottie," she whispered, jolting awake as I stirred, eyes wide. "You're awake." My throat was too raw to speak at first. Sophie held a cup of water to my lips. "What happened?" I finally rasped. "Blood clots in your lungs," she said. "Pulmonary embolism." "It was." She stopped, swallowing hard. "It was really bad, Lottie. If we'd waited much longer to call." She didn't need to finish. We both knew. I had nearly died on my father's kitchen floor while he accused me of faking. Dr. Whitmore came by shortly after, tall, kind-eyed, radiating the calm competence of someone who has personally out-argued death a few times and won. "Good to see you awake, Charlotte," she said, reviewing my chart. "You gave us quite a scare." She explained it all in clear terms. A clot had formed in my leg, almost certainly from the prolonged inactivity of my recent move and job search, and pieces of it had traveled to my lungs, blocking the vessels that carry oxygenated blood back to the heart. "The technical term is pulmonary embolism, or PE," she said. "Yours was significant. Several major vessels blocked. Your right lung was nearly compromised entirely, and your left was struggling to keep up." She didn't sugarcoat it. Without immediate intervention, this would have been fatal. Fatal. The word just sat there in the air between us. I had been dying, and no one in my family except Sophie had believed me until it was nearly too late. A week into my stay, with my condition stabilized, Dr. Whitmore suggested a family meeting. She felt strongly that everyone needed to understand exactly how serious this was, and that my symptoms should never again be waved away. Dad arrived first, then Sophie and grandmother, and, to my genuine surprise, Uncle Gregory and even Aunt Beatrice, who hadn't visited since the first night. Dr. Whitmore laid it out in plain, unemotional terms. How the clot formed, how it traveled, how it blocked oxygen from reaching my blood. When Charlotte arrived in the emergency room, she said, gaze sweeping the room, her oxygen saturation was critically low, and her heart was racing to compensate, putting enormous strain on an already failing system. To be perfectly clear, without immediate treatment, Charlotte would have died. We're talking hours, possibly less. My grandmother made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sigh. "How were we supposed to know?" Dad finally asked, defensive. "We're not doctors." Dr. Whitmore held his gaze steady. You weren't expected to diagnose her, Mr. Hayes. But when someone tells you they can't breathe, believing them is the first step. Getting her help promptly is what makes the difference between life and death in a case like this. The rebuke, professional as it was, landed exactly where it needed to. Something in me finally cracked open. I told you I couldn't breathe, I said, quiet but steady. I told all of you, and you said I was faking. The room went still. This is not the first time, I went on, gathering momentum. My whole life, every time I was sick or hurt, you told me I was being dramatic. You taught me to ignore my own body, to doubt my own reality. I blinked back tears. Do you know what that's like? Growing up never being believed. Being in pain and told it's all in your head. Gasping for air and being accused of putting on a show. Aunt Beatrice tried. Now, Charlotte, no one could have known this was serious. You've always been sensitive. I nearly died. I cut her off, voice rising. The doctor just told you that. And you're still making excuses. Her face flushed. Her mouth opened and closed without producing a sound before she stood and walked out. Dad sat rigid, something between anger and shame crossing his face. We're not mind readers, Charlotte. How were we supposed to know this time was different? You weren't supposed to know it was different, I told him. You were supposed to believe me every time. That's what parents do. He stood and walked to the window, saying nothing. Into the silence, Grandmother finally spoke, her voice thin but clear. She's right, Richard. We failed her. I failed her too. Dad's shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn. When Vivian died, Grandmother continued, you shut down. You couldn't handle the children's pain on top of your own, so you taught them not to show any. That was wrong. Sophie, quiet until now, reached for my hand. I've been keeping track, she said softly, pulling a small worn notebook from her purse. Every time you were sick and no one believed you. Every time you were hurting and got told to tough it out. She read a few entries. The migraine at 13 that turned out to be a serious infection. The sprained ankle Dad made me walk on for 3 days before an x-ray. The strep throat he sent me to school with anyway. Uncle Gregory shook his head. I had no idea it was this consistent, he said. I noticed sometimes. I didn't realize how often. It wasn't your responsibility, I told him. It was Dad's. And he chose not to believe me. Over and over. Dad turned from the window, face unreadable. I did what I thought was best, he said. I was trying to teach you to be strong. You taught me to doubt myself instead, I replied. And it almost killed me. He had no answer. After a long moment, he walked out without another word. He'll come around, Grandmother said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. I don't know if I can wait for that, I admitted. You shouldn't have to, Sophie said firmly. Uncle Gregory nodded. I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry, Charlotte. It was the first real apology any family member had offered, and it brought unexpected tears to my eyes. That evening, Tori arrived from Bristol, bursting in with a weekend bag and tears already falling. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, her face shifting from concern to fury to relief. I always knew your family was a mess, she said, but this takes it to a whole new level. They could have killed you with their denial. Then, practical as ever, you cannot go back to living above your dad's garage. When I admitted I couldn't afford my own place yet, she declared, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, then you're coming back with me. My old roommate moved out. The second bedroom's just sitting there. Hope, cautious and unfamiliar, began to rise in my chest, the good kind this time. 2 months after my near-fatal pulmonary embolism, I stood in the kitchen of my new Bristol apartment making tea while sunlight poured through the windows. Sophie had moved in with me after transferring to a nearby hospital. My recovery had been slow, weeks of overwhelming fatigue, chest pain, and the constant vigilance blood thinners require, every bruise a small jolt of fear. But gradually my lung function improved, my energy crept back, and the fear receded enough to let ordinary life back in. I found remote work as a marketing assistant. Less pay, but flexible enough for my medical appointments. My relationship with Dad remained complicated. He sent awkward texts asking after my health. Offering money I politely declined. We spoke on the phone sometimes, carefully steering around the past. He never explicitly apologized for dismissing my symptoms, but he stopped questioning me when I said I felt unwell. Aunt Beatrice and I had no contact at all, a generic get-well card with no personal note, and silence since. It was honestly a relief. Grandmother called weekly, our conversations more open than they'd ever been. She'd started therapy herself, trying to understand the family patterns that had caused so much harm. I should have protected you more, she told me once. I saw it happening and said nothing. That stops now. Uncle Gregory became an unexpected ally, visiting often, asking real questions about my well-being, and confronting Dad about how he'd treated me, which caused a rift between them that hadn't healed yet. But the deepest change was in me. I stopped second-guessing my own body. When it signaled pain or illness, I listened. No filter of doubt standing between the signal and my response. I'd learned, at enormous cost, that my perceptions were valid, my pain real, my needs legitimate. One Tuesday, I ran into Dad in the grocery store's produce section, of all places, because apparently the universe has a sense of humor about where reckonings happen. "Charlotte," he said finally, "you look well. I'm getting there." He examined an apple with unnecessary intensity before saying, "I've been thinking about what happened, about a lot of things. The way I raised you after your mother died, I thought I was teaching you to be tough. I didn't realize I was teaching you that your feelings didn't matter." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more than he'd ever offered. "I'm still angry," I told him honestly. "I might be for a long time. But I appreciate you saying that. Maybe we could have dinner sometime," he offered. "You and Sophie both. When you're ready." "Maybe," I said. Not a yes, not a no, just a door left slightly open. A few weeks later, Sophie doubled over one evening with sharp abdominal pain. Without hesitation, I drove her straight to the ER, brushing off her protests that it was probably nothing. The diagnosis was appendicitis, caught early enough to prevent rupture. Sitting by her hospital bed afterward, I realized something important. We had broken the cycle. We hadn't dismissed her pain, hadn't waited for it to become critical. We had trusted her body's warning signals immediately. Whatever pattern our father had set, it would end with us. One evening in early autumn, Aunt Beatrice called. Her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "I've been seeing someone," she said after some awkward pleasantries. "A therapist." She suggested I reach out. I said nothing, giving her neither encouragement nor rejection. "I said some terrible things that day," she went on. "And before that too, over the years. I was wrong and I'm sorry." "Thank you for saying that," I replied, unsure what else to add. "Your mother would be ashamed of how we treated you," she said, voice catching. "She never would have allowed it." I hadn't heard much about my mother growing up. "She was a fierce advocate for her children," Beatrice said. "She would have believed you. Always." After we hung up, I sat with that new fragment of my mother, a woman I barely remembered, whose advocacy, it seemed, had somehow survived in me anyway, in my refusal to be dismissed, in my insistence on being heard. One Saturday at a coffee shop, I overheard a young woman at the next table describing symptoms her family had waved off as anxiety or drama. Before I could second-guess it, I turned toward her. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, "but please get those symptoms checked out. Even if no one believes you." I told her a shortened version of my story, watching her expression shift from surprise to recognition. "I thought maybe I was overreacting," she admitted. "Trust yourself," I told her. "You know your body better than anyone else. And if a doctor dismisses you, find another one who'll actually listen." Walking home afterward, I thought about how far I'd come from that 4th of July, gasping for breath on my father's kitchen floor. The road had been painful and the lessons hard won, but I'd come out the other side with something precious. The unshakable knowledge that my experiences were real, my perceptions valid, my voice worth hearing. The embolism had nearly taken my life, but in surviving it, I'd found a freedom I'd never known before. The freedom to trust myself completely. No dismissal, no doubt, no criticism could shake that foundation now. And in that trust, I'd found not just healing but real strength. Have you ever had your concerns dismissed by people who should have believed you? How did you find the courage to trust yourself despite everyone else's doubt? Share your stories in the comments below, and remember to like, subscribe, and share this video if it resonated with you. Your story matters, and your voice deserves to be heard. Thank you for listening to mine. I hope it helps you trust your own instincts a little more today.